worries. As I've mentioned before, there's a small bonus for those presenting in the first week because everything is just new. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I am Rose and I am from Cameroon. I am a fourth year student in economics, international economics and law. And yeah, I think that's all. I'll be a little bit shy because I'm the first presenter, so I am worried about everything. So please just understand with me. So I am supposed to present on the first chapter of Pro Economics, and this chapter is entitled Trapped in Economy. Next slide, please. In the preface of the book, we are already facing like the different views of many economics and researchers as far as poverty is concerned. In the in the first part of the book, we are presented an exercise that is given to children to prove how people globally think about poverty. Given a general perception of poor children dying in the world and a particular case of a young girl in Mali, students tend to feel more interested in the case of Rukiaya, who was from Mali, than the general case of millions of children dying over the world. This proves that people feel not powerful enough to enjoy a bigger fight, but rather go for more particular cases. That is, they feel like if they contribute or not to big cases, it will not make that much difference, and they feel that the problem is too overwhelming. But when they come into particular cases, they tend to feel more compassionate and more generous about it. The chapter and the author suggests that poverty should not be seen as a big problem as a whole, but rather be seen as the consequences of many smaller problems. Um, in Poverty Trap, which the author described poverty trap as there will be, in quotes, there will be a poverty trap whenever the scope of foregoing income or wealth at a very fast rate is limited for those who have too little to invest, but expand dramatically for those who can invest a bit more. On the other hand, if the potential for fast growth is high among the poor, and trappers off as one gets richer, there is no poverty trap. Meanwhile, many economists debate the extent to which poverty trap may exist. In this chapter, we have two contrasting views from two different groups of experts. On one side, we have Jeffrey Sachs, who defends that poverty can be eradicated with the help of aid, while on the other side, we have William Esterlin and Moyo, who thinks that aid do more harm than good. However, the book doesn't tell us if aids are good or bad, but rather suggests to focus on the main point, that is, pointing out where it comes, not just pointing out where it comes from, but rather where it goes and how it is helpful. There is the need to figure out particularly where aids have positive or negative effect, and eliminate the negative effect to emphasize more on the positive effect to eliminating poverty. So is it possible to be trapped in poverty? Certain that some country, because of geographical position or just out of bad luck, they are poor and will stay trapped in poverty unless they are moved to another place. On the other hand, Estelle thinks that no condition is permanent because countries that were poor before are now rich. Hence, there is nothing like poverty trap. And we have this particular example from Rwanda. Rwanda was a poor country out of genocide. They received many many aid from many countries, and today they can be considered as a rich, prospering country. So so, hence, estimating that if the necessities are being provided, a country is actually able to overcome poverty. SAC participated in a project called Millennium Village Program, where villagers get free stuff, which includes fertilizers, school, meals, water, and many much other things. This school project costs $500,000 a year per village. In in this program, a Kenyan villager in a Kenyan village called Swari, there is this young farmer called Kennedy who was given free fertilizers and so was able to harvest 20 times more than the previous years and they could conclude that he would be able to sustain himself for all his life. That is, he was out of poverty. According to them, Kennedy was trapped in poverty, was trapped in the fact that he couldn't afford fertilizers. But now that he received fertilizer for free through it is it is no more a problem and he could be free from it. But anyway, however, some people still object this view, and they think that if fertilizer was Kennedy's only problem, he could just buy a little fertilizer and put it on the most suitable part of his field, and from the benefits that he will make from this part of his field, he could one more he could reinvest the gain and gradually grow his business. In this case, can we say that he was trapped up in poverty? Anyway, there are many other viewers who may say that, or maybe he didn't know how to use fertilizer, or he didn't know the use of fertilizer, or many other problem could be Kennedy problem. But affording fertilizer cannot be the only problem that Kennedy faced there. So we cannot say that Kennedy was trapped in poverty. Anyway, in this chapter, Bonerjee and Buffalo presented two diagrams with different slope to portray. Oh, I forgot about saying next slide, next slide. Oh, so I think
Okay.
we are on the next slide after this.
Uh,
Okay, yeah. So sorry. Bonerjee and Buffalo presented two diagrams with two different slopes to portray how the world looks like in the eyes of hate and anti-hate advocates. According to poverty trap advocates, the first diagram, this diagram, indicates that our income today determine our income tomorrow. Those who are in poverty trap zone, they keep on circulating in the trap. The S shape of the curves indicate that our income tomorrow is less even than income today. But those who are able to live outside the trap with a big push through it to shift initial income out of the trap can only experience an increasing income. To the contrary, next slide, please. To the contrary, the wall might look similar to the other graph shown in the paper. According to its component, who reject the concept of poverty trap, one-time gift to the poor can never change where they are heading. It may only boost it further, on but unable to change the long-term condition of the poor. The incident of Kennedy and the two graphs indicates to the impression that the theory is not enough to understand the reality efficiently. For the policymakers, it is not necessary to know millions of factors that trap the poor, but the key factor, alleviation of which might set the poor free of the trap. So we also had these simple problems of nets where WHO thought that it would be a good idea to give free net to poor people because millions of people are dying out of malaria. But we also ask ourselves, why are people unwilling or uninterested to spend $10 and save their life by affording a mosquito net, and instead when they are given mosquito net, they receive it and say they saved their life? Why they don't just sacrifice themselves and buy it? So some economics ask themselves, in this case, can we say that they are dying out of ignorance, or they are just dying out of unwillingness, or these nets are not really important for them? So however, however, in this chapter, Ahibit and Buffalo prescribe solution to this problem by a new way of experiment called randomized control trials. Next slide, please. Oh, no, not next slide. I'm sorry. Anyway, I will talk briefly about the Earth City. This solution will bring more defined answer to many poverty cases and will be experienced in different places two different ways. This method is economics, which will be able to find out where there is poverty trap and where there is not poverty trap. And along with better access to data today, this trial helped to test the theory with different treatment to participants that are comparable. So now I will go into my presentation and what I think about all this. Next slide. So the basic question that we will ask ourselves is poverty a good or bad thing for poor countries? As I mentioned before, I am from Cameroon, that is a poor African countries who benefit from it. And I have to confess that while reading this chapter, many questions came into my mind, and I kept asking myself, like, do we really benefit from this aid? Are this aid really, are we really trapped in poverty, or we are just like Kennedy, who didn't just know how to use the resources that he had already to come out of poverty by himself? So um, after all these question, I started so after analyzing it, I wish that all of you can should ask yourself the same question: is poverty good or bad? So let's come back to so I did some research. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit lost on everything. Please, can we go to next slide? So let's come back to our fundamental question: does aid do does more good or bad? So just 12 years ago, 189 members of states of the United Nations signed a declaration in which they said, we will spare no effort to free our fellow men, women, and children from the abject and dehumanizing condition of extreme poverty to which more than 1 billion of them are currently subjected to. In the same document, they promise to grant more generous development assistance, especially to countries that are genuinely making an effort to apply their resources to poverty reduction. In my presentation, we will focus on two main problems mentioned by SATS, which are determining if aids are really help for the poor, and analyzing the problem of aid management in the poor countries. Underlying that commitment is the assumption that foreign aid is a positive thing, that aid promotes economic development, and from the many good things will follow. But are the benefits of aid so positive and straightforward? Enhancing the effectiveness of aid as long as being the international development community's core agenda, given the limited resources available for the fight against poverty, the establishment of the Millennium Development Goal (MDGs) in the 2000 and implementation of the Paris Declaration (PD) on AIDS effectiveness in 2005, the international community has continued to improve the impact of AIDS on development. However, poverty still persists despite the drastic changes in the development landscape. Results presented in the past on aid growth have been quite often ambiguous and to some extent controversial due to the usage of aggregate aid data in various analyses. The insignificant, even negative result in the past should be regarded as natural because aid is not necessarily or directly targeted at as economic growth. The purposes of aid are diverse depending on the project and program. If the ultimate goals of aid is to reduce or end poverty, aid needs to benefit the poor more than other income group and reduce inequality. Past paid very little attention to the distribution of effect of aid for poverty reduction. Next slide, please. To shed the light on this, we conducted a series of cross-country analysis on the impact of aid on growth inequality and poverty using sector-level aid data, economic, social, and aggregate aid, and distributional income data of 116 countries over the past 3 decades, 60 countries over 2 decades for the sectoral aid analysis. Table 1 shows the result of the growth regression for conditional convergence with element of exogenous condition, a set of important factors such as policy, institutions, and factors of globalization and sectoral aid. The result shows that the impact of economic aid on growth was significantly positive. You can look on column 6, why coefficient of social aid at column 7 and aggregate aid at column 8 were positive, yet smaller and insignificant. This result imply that economic aid contributes a little to economic growth, and economic growth is already a sign that the country is much more better. In table 2, next slide, the estimate result of the examination of the variation of average income 1 to 5 by variation of average income of the country with economic, social, and aggregate aid respectively. We found that social and aggregate aid had positive systematic effect on 1 and 2 at the 1% significance level. At column 6, 7, 11, and 12, and negative systematic effect 5 at the 1% significant level. This finding proves that social and aggregate aid benefit the poor more than other income groups. Furthermore, this shows that aid contributes to reduce inequalities by narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor. The negative and insignificant coefficient attached to the rich may suggest that country might have worked on distributional policies while receiving international social aid. So the other problem that was mentioned was the bad governance of aid when it comes to poor countries. Next slide, please. Today, there is much more better governance in contrast to 2 decades ago, when official donors would not hesitate to provide major funding to government like that of Mobutu in Zaire and Narcos in Philippines. Such extreme misgovernance in official aid by traditional donors is rare today. For instance, even though multilateral financial institutions continue to fund government where there is high level of corruption and tend to be silent about dramatic governance, such as in Zimbabwe, at least they refrain from funding Mugabe's government during the worst excesses. The official donors aid committee has also become committed to improve aid effectiveness through better coordination mechanism, as illustrated by the important aid effectiveness high level forum HLF. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, no. Not conclusion already. Can we come back? Oh, yeah. So, process initiated in Rome in 2003, followed by the unusual substantive and concrete Paris Declaration in the second HLF held in early 2005. At that time, official donors agreed on a certain target to be met by 2011. A serious monitoring mechanism was put in place. It is very difficult nowadays for a for a government to mismanage the funds that are given for AIDS, and it has been even more emphasized at the Accra at the HS at the installment of the HLF was recently held in Accra in Ghana. At this meeting, it was agreed that it was agreed that they, there was lack of transparency on how official donors' monies are spent, and demanded that such items be explicitly included in the final resolution. And this was immediately implemented, and so reduced the way aid was partly used, and also the corruption that it made in poor countries. So now, conclusion, please. So to conclude, and among all people who think that aid does more good than bad, there is a billion of people living with less than $1 a day. People dying of hunger and so forth. Are they trapped in poverty? Or do they want to be poor? If you ask yourself these two questions, I'm sure you will get the right answer. Although there seems to be a very little progress in the situation of poor people in the world, and that the countries such as Rwanda, who really made it out of more than 60 countries, seem to be insignificant, just look at it as like if nothing was done, even Rwanda wouldn't have survived. So even if it is to save a single girl like Rukia from Mali, or change a farmer life like that of Kennedy life, it is still worth it. So I do not think it is a bad thing, or I think it does more good than bad to poor country, and I do not think that anyone choose to be poor unless they are trapped in poverty. So really there is a poverty trap, and poor countries really need it. So that's end of my presentation.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Rose, for your presentation. I'm sure that some of you already do have some questions to Rose, but I would ask you to just hold back a little bit, note them maybe down until we listen to our second presenter, who will present again on the same topic. We might have some overlap when it comes to covering the chapter's material, but I assume that in the discussion we're going to also have other stimulations and other points raised and so on. And then we would go to the Q&A rounds where you can ask either of the presenters any questions that you have, and then we get into our discussion. Okay, but please, if you do already have any questions to Rose, note them down, because otherwise probably you will forget them at some point. Okay, thanks, Rose, again. And now the floor is yours, Hyungbin, to give us your presentation.
Yeah, can you see the slides? Okay. Let me put it in presentation mode. Okay, I'll begin. Good afternoon. This is Hyungbin Park from the Division of International Studies, and I'll be presenting the first chapter of our book, Trapped in Poverty. So this is the table of contents. In order to prevent just myself storytelling the book, I reorganized the order of the contents of the chapter when I'll be summarizing the chapter for the first part of my presentation. And so for the first part, I'll be going through and summarizing the main points of the chapter in the order of importance that I felt while reading the book. Then in the second part for the discussion, of the chapter, I'll be doing a SWOT analysis for of the diverse points and arguments made in the chapter. I'll be using diverse professional and academic reports and papers, and as well as a book called Factfulness to evaluate the diverse arguments and contents of the chapter. Yeah, to start off, all the arguments of the chapter literally stem from this core question: is it possible to get trapped in poverty? Is it possible to be in poverty forever? There are two main perspectives toward this question. Jeffrey Sachs, along with international organizations such as the United Nations and World Health Organization, basically argue that the world should spend more on aid, resources should be given away, and we should help the poor. The reasoning behind their argument is that countries are rich and poor because of pure luck, and some could be trapped in poverty forever. On the other hand, there are people like William Easterly, American Enterprise Institute, who believe that we should be reducing the spending on aid and not force these countries to accept our help. We should be able to respect their freedom. The logic behind their argument is that the condition of poverty is not permanent, meaning that they can do better by themselves. Though there is no correct answer, I think there are many. I think the answer varies depending on whom your values rely upon. And the same could be applied to individuals, which is exemplified through Sachs' Millennium Villages project in the chapter. So basically, Sachs thought that giving fertilizer to a poor farmer called Kennedy helped his life. However, skeptics like Easterly might say that Kennedy could have bought a small portion himself and start from there so that we didn't need to help him that much as the others contend. However, people like Sachs might counter argue why Kennedy couldn't buy a small portion in the first place. So I think these debates around individuals, poor individuals, is also controversial when it comes to Sachs versus Easterly. All of these debates ultimately narrow down to the debate about the nature of poverty. Those like Sachs, who believe that there should be more aid, believe there is a poverty trap in which people cannot get out of poverty by themselves, while people like Easterly say there is no and believe people can become better by themselves. Those who believe in poverty trap contend that you can grow your income and wealth if you have a lot to invest, but you can't grow your income if you have too little to invest. So if you have a lot of leftovers and profit, then you can increase your profit, but on the other hand, you can't. People who believe there is no such thing as poverty trap say that the potential to be rich is high among the poor, and the possibility reduces as one gets richer. These kinds of conflicts and perspectives could all be summarized into the blue sentence below, which is how much you have today influences how much you'll have tomorrow. And this is the core element that you need to remember when we're talking about poverty trap. So this is one of the main parts of the chapter, which is they give two figures that each side believes best represents the world. One that believes in poverty traps, like Sachs, and the other that believes there is no such thing as Easterly. The important comparison factor is the shape of the graphs, so I'll briefly be going over them because for the graph of the poverty trap, the graph is S-shaped, while the graph for the no poverty trap is without the S shape. So let me go through the figure 1 first. First, figure 1 is supported by the advocates or believers of the poverty trap. If you see the straight line, you can see how your income today matches your income in the future. But the S-curve graph is divided by the straight line, meaning that the S-curve below the straight line is the poverty trap zone, and the others is outside the poverty trap zone. The part on the left is the poverty trap zone, as I said, but the important thing here is that as you move from A1 to A3, your income tomorrow will be smaller than your income today, and thus earning less and less and being trapped in the poverty zone. This fits with the description from last slide, if you remember, which said that those trapped in poverty zone will earn less and less. Having less and less to invest in your profit will make you get trapped in the poverty zone. However, on the right, if you move from B1 to B3, your income tomorrow is higher than today, which means that you'll get richer every day in the future. On the other hand, this figure 2 graph is what the majority of economists and those who believe there is no poverty trap contends that it best represents the world today. Unlike figure 1, it is not a S-shaped, as I've said before, and thus there is no poverty trap zone, meaning that all people earn more and more than today until their income is constant. This implies that people are becoming better and better, with no one earning less than yesterday, and no one being trapped in the poverty zone like the S-curve graph that we've seen in the previous slide. If you remember the last slide, this fits with the argument that the potential to become rich is high among the poor, and the chance reduces as you become richer. Because if you start from point 0 to A1, you earn a lot and your income increases dramatically. But as you move from A1 to A2, although your income doesn't increase as dramatically, you're still better off. So this is kind of the argument by the majority of economists who believe that there is no poverty trap. However, we need to be cautious that the statement that this is what the majority of the economists believe is by the authors of the book. So not really sure if for real majority of economists believe that there is no poverty trap. So we've gone through Sachs and Easterly's perspectives and the nature of poverty, the difference between poverty trap and no poverty trap, and its relevant graphs. So what's the point? Like, what should we do? What figure best represents the world? What are the answers to eradicate poverty? And what is the universal remedy that can actually eradicate poverty all around the world? I had the same questions by then, and the chapter answered that there is no ultimate truth or universal answer. One takeaway that the chapter suggests is that theories and diagrams are not enough, and that we need to scrutinize the topic of poverty case by case. Though, as Professor mentioned, this might be an outdated book, the chapter presents some bright aspirations for the future, so it was interesting to see how their prediction of the future matches the world today. First, high-quality data from a number of poor countries that were not available in the past due to lack of technologies is available now, which means that we can now calculate more accurate data and find commonalities of the region and apply the right remedies for regional poverty. Nowadays, not only do we have the accurate way of collecting data, but also saving them, utilizing them in statistics through AIs and big data, which is a massive boost from the past and really increases the efficiency of tackling poverty. Second, humans came up with RCTs, like Professor Hanafi mentioned last time. RCTs allow us with a more accurate testing and finding the results. In this way, we'll be able to find the cause and effect relationship of poverty and other sources, and also really boost the R&D department. I believe that these fit the world today as the chapter anticipated, and this kind of encourages that we should not give up eradicating poverty. At the end, the whole point of this chapter was to ask whether is it possible to be trapped in poverty and what are the ways to tackle poverty. The book answers there is no universal answer. However, we should not give up because though the speed might be slow and the progress might seem a bit static, it is possible to make very significant progress step by step with tests and data and with the sufficient technology that we have today. So this was kind of the conclusion of the chapter. And yeah, this was my summary. Next, I'll move on to my second part of my presentation for the discussion part. In the discussion part, I chose to analyze the points made in the chapter through a way called SWOT analysis. So I'll be identifying some of the strengths and weaknesses of the arguments themselves through presenting evidence, my thoughts, claims from others, and whether I agree or disagree. And I'll scrutinize the opportunities and threats from today's surrounding environment that would solidify or weaken the main point of the chapters through finding lots of academic sources and philosophical terms. I thought that a rich discussion is one that covers many perspectives on many topics instead of just scrutinizing one topic with just several perspectives. So I'll be going through as many topics as possible with diverse perspectives that I researched about. Then I'll end the presentation with citations and closing remarks. So before I begin, I wanted to just very briefly introduce you to a book called Factfulness. I'll be using the book Factfulness sometimes because I thought that it was highly relevant with the topics dealt in the chapter. So I wanted to very briefly introduce to you. It is a book by Hans Rosling, and it was recommended by Bill Gates, whom we know that has been working on eradicating poverty for years, and who's been suggesting books every year to his close friends and to the public. The 2 points that you should remember why I use this book to evaluate the arguments is because it argues that the world is becoming a better place than we think, which means that eradicating poverty might not seem like an impossible idea, as our chapter implies. Plus, this book presents 10 human instincts that blinds us from the true facts of the world, which I'll be using to agree or disagree to the arguments made in the chapter. First, I identify some of the strengths of the arguments by Easterly, Sachs, and I would like to introduce you to some points to consider when thinking about the Millennium Religious Project that was mentioned in the chapter. But remember when Easterly talked about how the poor is getting rich, so we do not need to spend tons of resources on eradicating poverty? Well, the 7 charts from the book Factfulness would provide evidence for this claim that the world is becoming better. I interpreted Easterly's claim that poor is now rich in a way that he tried to say that poor country is not fully rich but are becoming better and they're not trapped in poverty forever. So there are charts that show life expectancy continues to rise, child mortality continues to fall, global income inequality has gone down, more people are living in democracies. These are not just in developed countries but also in developing countries according to the book. So this challenges our perceptions, but when we look at this, we can say that, yeah, the world is becoming a better place than we think, like Easterly said. However, this is not to argue that we should care less about eradicating poverty, but how Easterly's claim can be strengthened with this book by Hans Rosling, and that there are advocates for this claim. Secondly, if you see number 2, on the counter side of the Easterly, there was a claim by Sachs, who said that poor countries are poor because of bad luck. This reminded me of the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, which points out that geological differences of countries was one of the main reasons why some countries were better off and some were not. America, for example, had its advantages of 2 grand oceans on size, rich soil and resources. And Russia, another powerful country, was able to control its land and manage the country well because the climate and environmental conditions throughout the country is the same as they are horizontal in length. Likewise, we can say that the countries in the south were just unlucky that they did not start from rich soil with less climate to manage the country well. So Sachs' point that we need to help because some countries were better off by pure luck also has some significance. Lastly, some people might be skeptical whether we should help Kennedy because some of you might be on Sachs and some of you might be on Easterly. However, I wanted to apply the veil of ignorance by John Rawls. Veil of ignorance basically talks, if you do not know whether you're going to be poor, rich, or even middle class, and if you have to decide whether the world should help the poor, it is highly likely that you're going to urge the world to help the poor because you do not know whether you're going to be poor, rich, or middle class. Likewise, I personally believe that we should help the poor because the universal thought that if you do not know what your class is going to be, you're going to have to choose to help the poor because that's what really benefits the global society. That's why terms such as noble established, that rich should help the poor, and categorical imperative by Kant, which what should be the universal value, was created. So if we think from these perspectives, and my personal belief is lied more and more on Sachs. Next, I'll be going through the weaknesses of some of the arguments. First, there was figure 2, that the world is becoming a better place. Despite of the chapter's claim that the majority of economists believe in the figure 2, which there is no poverty trap, I wanted to counter-argue because of the K-shaped recovery curve came into my mind. So if you see the graph on the right, this was from a report by KDI, Korean Development Institute, one of the most prominent economic institutes in South Korea, which talked about how the inequality gap between the rich and the poor is increasing through recovery from COVID-19. Like the letter K, the recovery is K-shaped, meaning that some people are better off after the pandemic, and some people were worse after the pandemic. While some are earning less, some are earning more after the pandemic, thus widening the gap. Like this report or KDI, the world isn't always becoming a better place, like Figure 2 in the chapter suggests. And another weakness would be a single perspective instinct from the book Factfulness. Single perspective instinct is the belief that humans look at an instant or situation using only one factor, in this case, which is income. However, there are so many indicators for poverty, but just by using income and saying that the world is becoming a better place has some flaws. So that's what I wanted to point out regarding the Figure 2. And another weakness would be Easterly's claim that we should not force poor countries to accept our help. This made me think of the widely known economist Milton Friedman's book called Freedom to Choose. Though the book is very focused on economics, the core message is that we should leave it up to the market and the people to choose. This might seem as if it is strengthening Easterly's claim that people should choose whether they should receive the aid or not. However, I want to emphasize that these countries and its people might not know that they even had the opportunity to choose to receive the aid or not, or even think of the benefits that they'll get from receiving the help. For example, the books for economics gives an example of forcing a kid to go to school. However, it is pointless if the child does not know what benefits he'll get from going to school, and be even more problematic if he didn't know any benefits from going to school, and also whether he could choose to go to school. So this leads to my number 2, which is Legacy Thinking Report by the South African Embassy, which is a report that I personally received from South African Embassy last year. Talked about what keeps the countries in poverty is legacy thinking. So before all these debates by Easterly and Sass, I really wanted to focus on education, that we should actually provide the people with the choices that they have, and also kind of erase this legacy thinking. Lastly, the author said that we should look at poverty case by case, and I agree, but it has some weakness because the role used to be the United Nations. But according to an international relations textbook by PhDs, the branch of the United Nations has diversified so much that the work efficiency is decreasing year by year. So I wanted to point out a weakness that case-by-case research might be on the decline, and its efficiency might be on the decline as well. So these were some of the weaknesses that I found in the arguments in the chapter. Third, opportunities for the arguments to be considered with attention were, I found 2 opportunities. The fact that the number of online research and development programs are increasing due to the pandemic would be an opportunity for regional case-by-case studies, as the chapter contends. Because before the COVID-19, no matter how much developed the technologies were, online programs were not given much attention. People preferred going to site, meeting in person, but these all had limits. However, the COVID-19 paradoxically revealed how convenient and efficient these online programs were. Report by UNESCO that I found this year revealed how global research and development expenditures and collaboration with other countries is on an increase ever since after the pandemic outbreak. I thought that this is a strong evidence and opportunity for the author's prediction of the future, that poverty should be looked upon case by case. Secondly, we are becoming more sensitive toward evidence-based support, which is also suggested by the chapter. The social awareness for where the money should be used, what data analysis and collection we need, and how the resources will be distributed is on the rise. One of the exemplary cases is when the Secretary General of World Food Program said that $6 billion of Elon Musk's stock worth would eradicate poverty. And Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, replied by saying how WFP should submit an evidence-based report with all their accounting plans. This kind of proves and also raises social awareness toward how all support should be evidence-based, because before people just used to donate money to support developing countries, so like these kind of cases kind of reveal how the aid is becoming more evidence-based. Some of the threats from the surrounding environment that might weaken the argument is how poverty eradication is still led by developing countries. This might seem like it's the way it is, but I would like to introduce you to the gap and things from the book Factfulness. So the gap instinct is basically how we humans tend to view a situation using only two ways: developed countries and developed countries. And the book says that we need to divide the countries by four levels. One being the most developed countries, the four being the most developed countries. However, from the perspective of a very developed country, all these countries that are low or less developed compared to them might seem like all developed countries when the country could be divided into three stages. So this kind of happens by applying this from efficient distribution of resources. Another would be difficulty of reversing the legacy thinking, which I found in the ISCA report. This report revealed how the cultural, social, political factors are harder to be influenced than financial factors. So no matter how much we aid and support these countries, if legacy thinking continues to thrive, poverty will continue to exist. Another would be the poverty traps of individuals from KRI report. Problems were identified in the report from 2016 that individual poverty traps are worsening in Korea, and they are less, they cannot be assisted in ways. So these might be kind of the threads that are surrounding the argument made in the chapter. So I would like to conclude my presentation using the quote from the chapter. The chapter said, "We cannot get there with lazy thinking. There is large in poverty," and it just suggests that we really need to think of ways to eradicate poverty, though there is no universal answer, and though the process might seem very slow. So I want to emphasize that, and these are my citations. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Okay, great. Thank you for your presentation and any thoughts here. I think with two presentations, we have a lot to talk about and to discuss. So I would suggest that we first start with any clarification questions that you have to either of to presenters. So, who would like to raise any questions? And please, first wait with questions that are more trigger discussion and stick more to really clarification questions. Then we go to the other kind of questions that are more open and definitely encouraging. But first, any clarification. My time. Yeah, we hear you. Speak up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned one that it was mentioned also in the chapter. One that was very poor country and because of genocide and war, they were really in a bad state, but because of the foreign aid that they received, they had better level today. No, I'm not a rich country, but a country that is doing better than before because of the aid.
Then Kibera, and then Chico.
Okay, so I have a question for both of you for roles. When you were talking about the social aggregated benefit or something, and you were showing the graph. So do you mean that like instead of me, what kind of social aggregated stuff that it have impacted? I just didn't understand. why does it feel more beneficial than eight, or is it that it's more addictive than eight? It's just I was a bit confused there. Like when you see a graph and you see social have more addictive benefit than eight, it benefits for people more than eight or something, or the diet is very good.